Over is solving by doing square roots. So we're going to take more of the approach of we're isolating for the variable. So I'll start off basic on this first one. If I'm trying to figure out x squared equals 16, there's not much of an equation there, yet it is still an equation. X squared equals 16, we're trying to find the answer of x. Now if you notice on the first factoring video, every single time we answered a question, we mostly had two answers. So the same thing is going to happen here. What we're going to do is I'm going to try to get x alone, since now x is currently to the second power. And again, even the directions give away how you're solving it. What's the opposite of squaring something? Square rooting something. So if I square root that side, squared and square root, they cancel each other out. But any equation, we balance both sides and do it both, not only the left side, but the right side. Okay, so back to this. The square root undoes the square, which is exactly what I want to do. Because again, remember, I'm trying to figure out what x is. Here's the catch, and please don't forget this. When I find the square root of 16, which does have a perfect square, that's why I said at the beginning when we were doing distance learning, the first thing I pointed out is you got to know your perfect squares. All right, so here's the perfect square of 16. Whoa, I don't know what that is. But anyways, I'll find it. Okay. The perfect square of 16 is 4. And that's what your calculator will tell you. However, let's also think about what also the perfect square of 16 can also be. The perfect square of 16 can also be negative 4, right? Because, let's just show a little work here. Negative 4 times negative 4, two negatives multiplied by each other, does actually become 16. So we start taking the square root method. When we find the square root of something, of course the positive answer is something that we naturally think of. Our calculator will give it to us as that. But we must not forget that we also have to do the negative version of that. So good look here. X could be two different numbers. X could be 4. X could also be negative 4. Two different solutions. Next one. X squared equals 48. Kind of the same approach. Again, I'm trying to get x by itself, so I'm going to square root that side, and I'm going to square root that side. And if you have a calculator, hopefully you guys aren't using Photomath. Alright, if I try to find the square root of 48, a decimal. And again, at the beginning of this whole quarter, I said no decimals. So what do we got to do to this? I can't find the direct square root of 48, so I'm going to break it down, simplify it down. Remember, the square and the square root are going to cancel each other out, so x. Again, we're going to have two answers from this, two separate answers. So here's all the factors of 48. 1 and 48, 2 and 24, 3 and 16, 4 and 12. Notice again how these numbers are getting larger, these numbers are getting smaller. It's not divisible by 5, it is divisible by 6, 6 and 8. The only number between them is 7, and that's not a factor of 48. Here's what I'm going to look for, perfect squares. Know those perfect squares. And there's another one right here, that's perfect square, I'm sorry. Which combination am I going to pick? 1, 16, 4, which one's the highest perfect square? 3 and 16. Remember, when you're doing this, you want to factor as much as possible. So you can use the largest perfect square. What is in fact the perfect square of 16? I mean, back to this. It's really quick. I want to explain. I am your teacher, at least for a couple more weeks. 3 times 16 is 48. That's how we're going to rewrite that number for right now. This number right here of those two numbers has a perfect square. Anyone know what it is? We just did it in the previous question. It's 4. So that's no longer going to be underneath. 3 stays underneath the radical. That will never leave. So here's one answer. 4 radical 3. Simplified as much as possible. Remember, we're not going to take radical 48. That's impossible. You won't see it, nor will it be selection. That's just one answer. Again, right here, remember we had two answers here, 4 and -4. We have to do the same exact thing. The other equivalent answer of that is -4 radical 3. Both of these answers would be sufficient enough for what x is. First answer, second answer. Last but not least, the little multi-step one, where again, I'm not just directly going to dive into square rooting. I'm going to treat it again like an equation where I'm solving for things. All right, so again, I'm trying to get x by itself. Here's our equation. All this stuff has to go. So again, first I'm going to add 5. Again, because what's the opposite of subtracting 5? Adding it. 17 plus 5 is 22. And again, I'm trying to get x by itself. That means this 2 has got to go. This is 2 times x squared. What's the opposite of timesing? Dividing. I'm going to divide both sides. 2 and 2 will cancel out. We have x squared equals, what was that? 11. All right, so here's where we are in the first literally 2 questions I did before. So we've got to that point. So, shocker, we square root both sides. We're going to get how many answers for x? 2. Here's the thing about 11. 11 doesn't have a perfect square, nor the only factors of it are 1 and 11. It's that prime number. Remember all that stuff from the beginning of the year? So here's what I'm going to do. I really can't break it down any further. If I simplified it, it really wouldn't do much. So I'm just going to leave my answer as radical 11, positive radical 11, and what's the other answer? Because there's always 2. Negative radical 11. And please make sure that you realize that the negative has to be on the outside. It is not allowed to be on the inside unless we were dealing with imaginary numbers, and we would have done that if we weren't doing distance learning, but it was scrapped. All right, so they're solving by doing square roots. See you guys soon out in the real world, maybe.